Good evening to those of you who are joining us from East Africa, Middle East, and Europe, and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from the United States and Canada. My name is Mohamed Sheikh Ibrahim. I am the General Secretary of the Horn of Africa Policy Center. We are honored today to be hosting this timely and important conversation about crisis in Ethiopia. For those who don't know, the Horn of Africa Policy Center is an independent, non-profit, non-partisan organization for scholarship regarding the Horn of Africa with a focus on the Somali people. It has a temporary headquarters in St. Paul, Minnesota, and has agents in the Jiga of Somali region, Mogadishu, Hargeisa, Kismayo, and Nairobi as well. The Horn of Africa Policy Center aim is to inform and influence public policy through field-based research, informal analysis, and innovative solutions in the form of reports, policy previews, and public debates. Our topic today is Ethiopia in crisis, imagining the path forward. We will be taking questions from the audiences throughout the event. They will be intuited in our conversation. I'm honored to turn over to Senior Fellow Dr. Ismail, who will be moderating our discussion today, and the organizer of the event, Ms. Hafsa Mohamed, Humanitarian and Development Expert. Many thanks for joining us, and over to Dr. Ismail and Ms. Hafsa. Welcome.
Thank you, Mohamed. I think Hafsa will say some, words before she'll pass to me.
Definitely. What I can do is I can, maybe Dr. Ismail can introduce everyone, and then I can discuss the objectives of this discussion, or should I go ahead and mention the objectives in the program title first?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so this program, Ethiopian Crisis, Building Solidarity, Imagining Paths Forward, hopefully will be, the discussion objectives are to display solidarity toward each other, the suffering communities throughout Ethiopia, particularly in Oromo, Tigray, Somali, Amhara, Ment, Beshangul, Afar, and rural areas throughout the country, to discuss humanitarian crisis faced by the vulnerable communities in the Horn of Africa, to send messages to communities in Ethiopia and in the diaspora, to bridge gap between communities in Somali region or from the Somali region, Tigray and Oromo by addressing past issues, supporting reconciliation and repatriation efforts, and sending messages to the respective communities, victims of state-imposed violence and marginalization, to debunk or challenge the criminalization or demonization of EPRDF, or regardless of the known fact that the economy and democratization of Ethiopia started with EPRDF, to attract international attention, to shadow, debunk efforts by Addis Ababa that gaslight the experiences of victims or exclude opposition members and parties, to provide preview on possible predictions regarding upcoming events in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa, and especially to create space for the many discussions and efforts to come to reach our collective goal of either establishing a multinational federalism system or divesting from Ethiopia and becoming independent nations and countries in the Horn of Africa. So yes, those are the objectives of today's discussion. Thank you. And
yeah, thank you very much, Hafsa. As Hafsa put it, the theme of the topic today is Ethiopian crisis, building solidarity and imagining path forward. And we have, prominent panelists, but we have a little bit of a technical problem to reach Getachew Reda, but we will try our best, to connect them while we are in the middle of, the panel. The discussion, we will try to, to talk to him if we can. Anyway, the panelists are today, Professor Hassan Keynan, former senior UN specialist, professor and the Horn of Africa political analyst. He's a well-known also in the poem. He has been one of the forefront, activists to put in the Somali cause on the map. The second person we have is Jaal Odaa Tarbi, one of young, flamboyant from He is international spokesperson of Oromo Liberation Army. And also the third person, as I said earlier, we might reach him. Getachew Reda is a senior spokesman of the Tigray People Liberation Front. As my sister Hafsa alluded and put it, as you know, in his inaugural speech on April 2nd, 2018, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed promised the Ethiopians that he would lead them to democracy. He underscored that there would not be a single gunshot and pledged that Ethiopians would enjoy peace and prosperity. With his charisma and rhetoric, he won the hearts of millions. Unfortunately, that euphoria was short-lived and dashed. Free and fair election failed as Abiy government cracked down on the opposition. This caused major political parties in Oromia, such as Oromo Liberation Front, Oromo Federalist Congress, Odaa National Liberation Front, and others to boycott elections that were eventually held in June 2021. With the war in Tigray, which led to election not being held in that region, it was clear that there was no strong opposition that could stand in the way of Abiy Prosperity Party. In addition, indeed, what could have been described as a solo-run Prosperity Party won more than 90% of seats in the federal parliament and regional councils. Far from achieving the long-sought consensus in Ethiopian politics, the election itself became another source of discontent. In Tigray, the civil war that erupted in November 2020 brought the country to the gates of hell. In what was unimaginable in modern Ethiopian history, the federal government invited another country's military, Eritrea, to invade one of the regions. Unspeakable atrocity at the hand of Ethiopians, Eritreans, and the Amara force were hallmarks of the war. Ethiopia pride itself on thousands of years of unbroken statehood. But that is, of course, today a myth. What we are experiencing today is the burning of human beings alive by the Ethiopian security. As these days, there was a word that is coined, and it's saying that Ethiopia Prosperity Party was an attempt, to restore Ethiopian empire. However, they have lost the state that they inherited in the last 27 years. First, I will welcome Professor Keynan to ask him a few questions. Mr. Keynan, as you have written many articles, and as I say, you put the Somali cause on the map. Can you please shed light on the formation of the state building of Ethiopian empire?
Well, thank you, Dr. Ismail. I thank the Horn Public Policy Center team. First, I would like to add a little bit regarding myself. As mentioned, I'm an independent Somali who is interested in what's going on in Ethiopia and in the broader region. Having said that, I think you mentioned in introduction a very important concept about the state. I think before we try to solve Ethiopia's problems or build solidarity with other communities, it is very important that we understand the root causes of the problem. In my view, what we see today or last year or the year before is just the most pathological manifestation of a system that has started over a century ago. Really what we are seeing is in Abiy's Ethiopia is an attempt that we have seen before in Ethiopia for an Ethiopian leader jumping into the limelight and trying to finish the unfinished business of Menelik. If we really want to understand the problems that endlessly plague Ethiopia, we have to go back to the architecture of the Ethiopian state. I think the pathologies, the genocidal impulses, the dark impulses that have stalked Ethiopia for many decades have their roots in the hegemonic and to some extent criminal nature of the Ethiopian state. Where did the Ethiopian state come from? As you know, I'm not a specialist, but I have read enough about state systems. No state system is perfect, and none of them have started in the best way possible. Many of the state systems have a difficult times. But what is specific about Ethiopia is that once during the period of Menelik, Ethiopia was just an imagination. It had three elements. One was imagination. Why imagination? Because this Abyssinian king has imagined areas, territories, nations over which he has no control. That imagination included lands and peoples that go beyond today's borders of Ethiopia. Two, the other element was fraud. Why fraud? In cahoots with European colonial powers, Menelik has managed to fraudulently claim and legalize lands and borders that over which he had no control. And the third element was terror, which was what Menelik's armed men, also known in Amharic, I don't know, but I hear a lot, Menelik's armed men, Naftiya. These are the three elements, and all of them have their roots in Abyssinia. So in my view, at the core of the Ethiopian tragedy is something called Abyssinian power algorithm. If you know, algorithm is a self-sustaining system that is constructed by an engineers to develop its own operation independently. But the problem with Abyssinian power algorithm is that it was borrowed wholesale from Abyssinian state and is smuggled into what we know now as Ethiopia. And that a prominent feature of that state system is really institutional hostility towards other communities, other nations. And unless that system is really overhauled, Ethiopia will remain the abode of tyranny that it has always been. So to put it simply, the problems that we see today started 132 years ago, and they are deeply embedded in the architecture of the Ethiopian state, in the political culture of the Ethiopian political class. The Ethiopian political class have not managed to build a political framework that is inclusive enough, that is democratic enough, that makes everybody confident that they have a stake in this system. That is the root cause of the problem. And what we see in the history of Ethiopia, if we look at who ruled Ethiopia, the rulers of Ethiopia during the last let us say 100 years, they were very different in every respect. But what we see in all of them is these cyclical tragedies and terror schemes that they end up with. And that is really the roots of the Ethiopian problem. It is the state system, and that is the one that needs fixing. We are talking about droughts and famines these days, but Ethiopia suffers also from political famines and from political droughts. And that is the root cause of the problem. And it is a system that is inherently criminal and inherently hegemonic. No one will be safe, including those who are trying today and telling that they own the system. Eventually, they will be victims. It is a system that is tailor-made for self-annihilation.
Mr. Keynan, let me follow up this question. As you know, even currently, when we put the Ethiopian reality, particularly what we consider as in your kind of people, intelligentsia, today they still insisting, the curse of Ethiopian problem is ethnic politics. And as you know, Ethiopia is a multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-religious, from different aspects of social science, if we look at it. Why? Yes, Amano? Yes, Amano, yes.
Yusuf Getachew ድምጽ በጣም ካንተ ጋር እየመጣ እየረበሸን ነው ሚውት አድርገው
ምንድን ነው ያልከው? እስቲ ደገመው ወንድሜ፣ አልሰማንም። ምንድን ነው ያልከው? አይሰማኝም ያልከውን እስቲ ድገመው ወንድሜ።
Is it what is going on?
Ismail, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Keynan, what I'm trying to, what I'm alluding to it is the Ethiopian intellectuals, mostly people who come from the north, always they are blaming, they are saying the curse of Ethiopia is ethnic politics. And as you know, Ethiopia is a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, from all aspects of life. How on earth, these two different schools of thought will reconcile? On one side, that what we see today, the reflection of the PP, prosperity, that are articulating, the concept of unitary states, and the majority of Ethiopia, more than 80%, that want a federal system. How we can reconcile the two concepts?
I think, as I said before, when we say Ethiopian intellectuals, whether it's from the north or those even not from the north, they have accepted a system that I said is self-destructive, inherently self-destructive. In the history of states, there are almost every state is multicultural in nature. There are very few nations, very few nation states in the world that are completely hegemonic. So what they're trying to do, in my view, is actually a centralized and brutal homogenization of diversity. This is a formula for disaster. In the history of statecraft, people who say that ethnicity is the problem, and they have been in power for over a century, and they have not solved their problem. It appears to me that they do not understand what ethnicity is, and they do not really, in my view, understand what the state system is. In my view, they are trying to transform other identities into one overarching ethnic identity. That is what they are trying to do. If the bottom line is a system that serves everybody, there is no to demonize other nations and the ethnicity itself. That is who we are. That is the reality on the ground. If you want to change the realities on the ground, it has to be done in a way that is inclusive for everybody. But for one group, whether it's intellectual group or political class, to seize power and then organize, establish its own party, whether it's Prosperity Party or a different name, then decide for everybody else, that is a recipe for disaster. That is what we are seeing, what we are observing in Tigray now. A system that cannot differentiate between descent and entire nations is a system that suffers from a pathological disorder. The Ethiopian political class, if they encounter any form of dissent, their default option is to destroy the entire nation. This political culture is really a self-annihilating political culture. So ethnicity is not the problem. The problem is the demons of homogenization, who is trying to tell other ethnic groups that it is you who are the problem. Where are they from? Do they not belong to certain history, certain nationality, certain ethnicity? Where have they come from? So in my view, it has no empirical evidence. These ideas have no basis in history or in statecraft. It is really a political ploy to dominate other nations, as we have seen. And at its core, it is really the Abyssinian Pearl algorithm. It is a system. But the problem with those who have led Ethiopia to this Abyssinization campaign have forgotten even the key to that algorithm. What they are trying to maintain is a medieval system. Medieval system, they want to impose a medieval system on nations and peoples who are living on 22nd century. That is unworkable. It is not in the interest of anybody to take that approach to statecraft. And the latest, today I heard on BBC Somali service, a gentleman that I once met, who has been elected as the vice president of the Prosperity Party. It was really sad what he was saying. If anybody with a modicum of human decency who sees how that party was structured, the speed with which it was structured, the fact that it was one man, one delusion-prone man who has presided over everything, the manner and organizational structure that we have seen. It is really a recipe for disaster. In my view, what we have seen the last few days is not much different from what we have seen 132 years ago. What is the difference is a matter of scale and a matter of time. But at the core, it is internally, it is a hegemonic system and an inherently a criminal state that will destroy everything, in my personal view.
Mr. Keynan, you know, one of the, best scholar who has written many books on Horn of Africa in general. You know his name is John Markakis. John Markakis wrote, his last book, the Ethiopia, the Last Two Frontier. And in that, there is one premise, which is, how steady, when he did a study on the nation, building, there is a premise that he's arguing. Markakis' main argument is that despite, revolutionary upheavals, the unequal relationship between center and periphery in Ethiopia remain essentially unchanged. That is core argument. Can you put, that premise in the context of Somali region?
I have enormous respect for Markakis. He is very insightful and very enlightened individual. I do not suggest that we got stuck in some frameworks. The idea of the periphery and center is in my view, this is my personal view, is really meaningless. Because what matters is the system, the architecture of the system that is at the center. That system is inherently self-destructive system. And if we look the other way, for example, when we say the Somali at the periphery, who is the Somali? What we mean by Somali? Somali is a nation, is a national identity that preceded, in my view, for sure, Ethiopia itself, and may have preceded even Abyssinia itself. This is an identity, a national identity that encompasses some over 30 million people in the Horn of Africa. They inhabit the most strategic and real estate in the Horn of Africa, from the Red Sea to inside Kenya. So when one formulates the idea of the center, I can put forth the argument that actually geopolitically, the geopolitical landscape, if we look, if we put on the right glasses and see the real geopolitical landscape on the Horn of Africa, the Somalis should be at the center, not at the periphery. But some structures for historical reasons that started in the early 20th century, the legalization, fraudulent legalization of the disastrous political construct that Menelik has imagined is really what we have inherited, the center and the periphery. But what my argument is that the center itself does not hold. It does not exist anymore. And from the beginning, it was itself based on the three elements that I have described. So I think we are past the idea of periphery and center. The center is no longer. And when it existed because of three diabolical elements that cannot sustain life. It was a system that was incompatible with the preservation of human life. Not only Somalis, Oromos, today, for example, although the most genocidal intervention has happened in Tigray, I know there is what I personally described as crimson, as rose terror in Oromo. There is not only ethnic genocide, but a cultural genocide going on in Oromo. In the dark, the world does not see it. We are preoccupied with other places, but I have worked in that country for some time, and I worked with the universities there. And some of the students in those universities call me sometimes and telling me the terror that the people in Oromia live. So where are the Oromos? The Oromos are the center. So I think although it has some meaning before, at this stage, I don't believe it makes any sense to talk about the center and the periphery. The center was based on fraudulent construct, and now it has collapsed. There is no center that can save Ethiopia anymore. I'm sorry, but that is how I see it.
Okay, what is the fundamental Somali question in Ethiopia currently?
That is a very good question. I think that there are two elements in the Somali question. One is the same with every other nationality that have been corralled into the abode of tyranny that was envisaged by Menelik. So in that respect, the Somalis are an entity whose land has been seized by force and basically colonized. But the Somali question has also a peculiar attribute of its own, which is the one I have described before. It has a sub-regional geopolitical component in it. And the Ethiopian political class have never understood the Somali question for what it is. And the institutional hostility that I have associated with the Abyssinian power algorithm, one of the main targets is really an institutionalized hostility towards the Somalis, anything Somali. And that has cost Ethiopia a lot. They have never, if we take borrow concept of business, for example, if you are the CEO of a business, and you have been in business for 130 years. And during a century and 3 decades, your business has not only lost and lost and lost, but has completely eroded any legitimacy, and it has become a criminal entity. Then how can you maintain that you want to continue with such business for another one? So to summarize, the Somali question in the Ethiopian equation has 2 elements. One is, in my view, is a colonial question. Like many other nations in the south and the east that the Menelik's men have seized and fraudulently claimed and legalized. The other issue, the Somali question, has a broader sub-regional element in it. And the Ethiopian political class during the past 100 years and more, they have tried to not see that one. They have tried to make half of the Somali question invisible. And that is the strategic blunder that has really blighted Ethiopia for centuries, for over a century. So to make it short, it is really a colonial repression question, and also it's a question that is anchored in a broader sub-regional reality that the Ethiopian political class and the Ethiopian state does not want to realize and recognize.
Okay, I'll come back to you, and I would like to move on into Jaal Odaa Tarbi. Jaal Odaa Tarbi, first, welcome to our Somali forum here. And first, I would like to quote here a brief description of Oromo nation by the renowned Professor Mohamed Hassan, who teaches in Atlanta, Georgia. He has written many books on Oromo, history. And here, what he say about Oromo nation. Oromo has earned the leadership OLF has earned the leadership and trust of the Oromo nation. For the Oromo, the OLF is much more than an organization. It's an idea that has captured the imagination, the heart, the soul, and the spirit of the Oromo. It is, tirelessly works for the self-determination of Oromoma. Let me ask you this. Can you please dig into Article 39? As you know, the Ethiopian constitution is one of the best, classic that the late Malaz Zenawi used to say when they were writing in 1994. Even, comma and kwan, even the comma and the period, we get it from the United Nations, from different, perspective of, legal, things. So my question to you is, today, an Oromo, leader called Abiy, he is trying to dismantle Article 39. And please, first, before we go to what we have with him, can you talk about and shed light on the concept of self-determination within the perspective, and can you ground it within the Oromoma?
Sure. I hope everybody can hear me. So when it comes to Article 39 and self-determination, that has the addition of that article into the Constitution was considered one of the biggest victories for the Oromo struggle since it started in the 1970s. Because in essence, when it boils down to it, our goal is self-determination, and what that means practically, meaning what we would expect to see before we can say we have finally achieved it, would be the empowerment of the Oromo people on their land, to be able to choose what kind of political relationship they wish to have with their neighbors. From the OLA's view, we do not make specific, we do not advocate a specific position. So for a lot of times when it comes to Oromos, there is the label of secessionist that is often put on us. For some people that is negative. We do not necessarily believe so. However, we do not wish to actually make that choice for the people. So for us, we want to empower the people to be able to make that choice, and whatever choice they make is something that we are happy to accept. We believe the various subjugated peoples in Ethiopia as a whole that were forcefully annexed into the empire must be empowered to choose their futures, much like we wish the Oromos to do as well. They need to be able to choose their representation, and if that representation, that candidate runs on a ticket of secessionist and wins,